So each of these systems have their own peculiarity.
Quite.
And on the other hand, Zoom hasn't quite fixed their virus issue.
Goes in first. About 45, 50 minutes. We're discussing a chicken at the moment.
Ah, very good.
You're talking with a chicken?
We're talking with a chicken.
Okay.
Well, I cooked several of them for lunch.
Now we're at the Louvre.
At least one and a half.
Are these your own images, Norman?
Which it's not. Yeah, they're my own images. Which is nice to be at the Louvre because you can go online and take tours of the Louvre. Mm-hmm. The National Gallery in Washington's got a bunch of Degas out. Mm-hmm. The Metropolitan Opera is streaming one of their great performances every day. Opera Vision's doing the same thing. There's all sorts of good stuff happening. If you feel like it. In general, I don't. Mm-hmm.
Well, I approve, Domenic, of your bald pate. I think I'm going to go that way myself very soon.
Well, it's more dignified.
Much more dignified,
also,
absolutely.
It's more dignified, and also people like stroking it better.
Oh yes, that's right. And you can't have a bad hair day, just not possible.
You can't have a bad hair day, and the maintenance costs are low.
Very, yes, quite.
Yeah, but Norman has understood this for a long time.
Yeah.
Yes, even in my early 20s, I was bald hair with a ponytail. I had that, what did you call that? You would call it the maitre d' look.
Yeah.
Did you
at one point have a funny little goatee?
Oh, no. I have too much dignity for even that.
Because who was that friend of Jim Maze's from way back? That very smart young guy from MIT. Well, he was young then. John Yort?
Oh.
Jim Yort?
I don't
he was a very bright guy who liked doing dynamic programming and stuff like that for solving complex objective functions, and created the most terrible mess when Jim was let loose with the pricing structure at Ocean Route, which he tried to optimize.
Did Jim do a good job at Ocean Routes, or was he just politically incorrect?
Well, I think, how would I put it? He was a hammer in search of a nail.
Oh.
No, there you go. Very, very common for people with military background, I think.
But it's actually current right now.
And also Jim had only just finished his PhD, or was it he'd done his PhD and then he'd gone off to business
MBA.
So what he wanted to do, which a lot of people with MBAs do want to do, is to immediately apply everything he'd learned in a purposeful way. And actually, you need, because I remember when I finished at Stanford and joined the Boston Consulting Group, the first thing I was told on the first day was, forget everything you learned at business school. Now we start from scratch. And I think that was actually quite an important directive.
Yeah.
Well, I was pretty much kicked out of business school for writing something about the importance of business school, which was essentially to make it difficult to get into business school. So you admit bright people. You prove that they're willing to do nothing but bullshit for 2 years. And this is exactly what industry wants, is very bright people who are willing to put up with a lot of bullshit for 2 years, which means that they can work in that corporation under the influence of nothing but bullshit.
Bruce, I've been teaching these people for the last 25 years. Thank you, Norman.
Well, this is a good idea because...
Although actually, what I now teach them is philosophy anyway.
Yeah, well,
What's that?
important thing
They
is,
get Kant, they get Nietzsche, they get lots of good stuff. Or whether they think they need it or not.
well, they didn't. But the important thing is not to train them so that they'll take your job. So they have to keep respecting you, but not be competent to take your job.
Well, what it does is makes them very fluent in bullshit. So that's good. It's the perfect preparation.
Well, oddly, interestingly, there was a little piece done on George W. Bush, and the George W. Bush being the ultimate indictment of the Harvard case method. And I think because the Harvard case method, which I don't use, is where, you cold call on Norman, for instance, and you say, so, Norman, what would you do as the chief executive, which Norman's never going to be, by the way. And so Norman then is eloquent for all of 90 seconds, and the instructor puts a little tick against the photograph of Norman and then moves on to the next victim. And it does mean that you are trained to sound very credible in 90-second sound bites. Donald Trump went to Wharton, which I guess is a lesser school, because he was trained to speak in, 15-second sound bites? Somewhat.
He's worked up to 15 seconds. I think it was less than that at the beginning.
That's interesting. Donald Trump did go to Wharton. Did he do anything at Wharton? Did he respond? Did he write papers? Did he show IQ above room temperature at any time?
His daughter, who also went to Wharton, Ivanka, who my partner Lucas, as you know, did quite a bit of work with Donald Trump's first wife, Ivanka, who lives in London.
Yes.
Ivana, who's also from the Czech Republic, and Ivana's the mother of Ivanka. And Ivanka is meant to be a smart girl. She did very well at Wharton, came in the top 10% of her class, I believe. And like some hotels, which won't be doing well anytime soon.
Yeah. But what about Papa Trump? There doesn't seem to be any folklore or legend coming out of Wharton. They must keep to themselves about Uncle Donald.
He probably bunked off all the classes, no?
Could be. Well, we spend a lot of time demeaning Donald, but the real problem, I think, is Mitch McConnell. All three of his daughters, of course, have rebelled against him and become Democrats and run organizations for the environment, and spend a little bit of time talking about what an evil person their father has become. And apparently, early on, he was not that evil person. Early on, he had thoughts and
emotions and other human things.
And for some reason, we have no idea why he doesn't believe anything he says, but
I think it's the Chinese wife.
Pardon me?
I think the Chinese wife turned him into a path of pure money making.
Mm-hmm. Well, his Chinese wife is who paid for him running for Senate.
Well, she wants a return on investment.
His Chinese wife owns large corporations in New York, which are his big suppliers. His Chinese wife is probably, or his Chinese wife's family is perhaps the more interesting part of the economy that's happening now, but she seldom gets mentioned.
Yes.
And she's the only cabinet minister that hasn't been fired.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent point.
Bruce,
very interesting.
So Bruce, I'm actually admiring that shirt that you're wearing, which I think outdoes the Tyrannosaurus Rex behind you, Norman.
Oh, do you see where I got shot?
I'm feeling very
right here.
That's more like it.
Yeah, I was shot.
Stigmata.
Yeah, it was a pellet gun
from Easter.
Surface
from
one.
Easter, where the Roman soldier did the job with the lance thing.
Yeah. I try to avoid that illusion, but yes, it's a bit unavoidable with this shirt on.
Yeah.
Quite.
No, it's very fine. So, how the hell are you?
Well, I'm on my mother's plan, which is, I think I am. I'm still at least as close to it as I've ever been of going back to Washington. Hopefully not for a good long time, another 20 years. 21 years. Things are working. I just passing around the proposal for the Steve Jobs Foundation. Draft of it. I haven't actually approached the executors or whoever has got the naming rights at the moment. But presumably, if we do get those, then we'll also get the money concurrently. And I've been targeting Larry Ellison because he hasn't given any money over to a nonprofit yet, really. So he's the prime candidate, and of course, Miss LP Jobs. All I've managed to do there is to get a restraining order from her security guard, valid until Halloween 2022. So I might do well to stay away from California until October 2022, and actually, I'm very inclined to do so. I'm rather sick of Californians, actually. So many of them are just stretched to the margin, making their mortgage payments. They're rather annoying. And back in Cambridge at the moment, came back here on Wednesday, and I would hope to continue this trek around the world. I am a bit limited by my self-imposed carbon dioxide emission limitation, which is 1,000 miles of travel per month. So you can imagine it'll be quite a slow trip around the world with some rather long stops, like maybe in Buenos Aires and then back in Europe, and then finally on to my first visit to Asia.
That's bicycle speed, Bruce.
Yes, rather, but it means some long stays. I don't believe in traveling and just going on the golf course or hobnobbing out of earshot of the authorities in some godforsaken conference room. So no, so it'll be a slow cultural tour where I work on my Spanish, German, and maybe Chinese. And then well, anyway, we'll see. But I really want to get this Jobs Foundation and some of the tech projects I've been working on for the last 40 years off the ground before then, and probably as competitions within the Steve Jobs Foundation, which has the goal of emitting twin entities. One is a body of open source intellectual work, usually software, and the other would be a startup company, which has had a chance to form and reform through the competition series, such that the programmers or the workers are really elite. And the idea is to produce both the iPhone and the Android in whatever market we're in, and to target markets where the valley of death is particularly wide, and the elevation of the desired peak is much higher than the one that we are currently at. So,
because because you only see these things in hindsight, but I remember way back when we were at Stony Ridge, you were already talking about group authoring.
Oh yes, well that was really my focus.
I was thinking, what on earth Bruce on about? And then that, of course, is something that became absolutely, mainstream 15 years later.
Well, sort of, although actually what I was working on there with those prototypes still hasn't really arrived. And I had an interview, although it wasn't advertised to me as going on an interview with Steve Jobs at Next. And Leo, you remember Leo Horvitz, right? You overlapped with him, didn't you?
Who was one of the subsequent flatmates up in Stony Ridge, yeah.
Right. Well, he worked for Jobs for quite a long time. He was an employee at Apple, and then he was the first employee at Next. And then he worked for Jobs at Pixar, although, no, I think it was basically Jobs' report inside of a direct report within the company. But anyway, he moved on to Japan, actually, and married a beautiful princess. But But very interesting for a guy who came out of, born with spinal bifida and came out of Flint, Michigan. But anyway, but Leo warned me about what it was like to work for Steve Jobs, at least in the Apple days and the early next days, and that you work your tail off. He'd do a demo. He'd walk in for a few minutes, tell you what shit, walk away, and then a week later he'd come back, tell you about this great idea he just had, which happened to be exactly what you showed him, with some improvements. So Jobs walks in and to Leo's office, starts inspecting the back of the Sun workstation very seriously, and I just look over him and I think it's not going to work. Either he's going to not hire me and steal the idea, or he'll hire me and fire me right away. So I didn't open my mouth. Which is bloody stupid, actually, because the whole education environment could have been advanced by 10 years if I had, opened my mouth for online learning. It would have been a combination of Wikipedia plus educational environment, all in the same. Where you're constantly refining the materials by interactions between students and TAs and students professors that they can get on demand. But that actually still hasn't really happened. For want of like Apple pencils or drawing tablets next to where students can sketch out ideas, and some subjects are just not amenable, like math particularly, to just talking and typing. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's where that went. But anyway, I mostly studied innovative transportation or transformational transportation technology in the aughts, and employed a very talented young Italian to develop video of that. And he carried it forward and went to Dubai, which I did not want to do, to get money for a full-scale mock-up. But I had a 50-year plan for transportation, kind of what's inevitable just because of physics. That needs to be put on the road. And I want to do a new social network that's based on vocal interactions, because voice is very good for one person talking to a few. And that's basically what the conversation threads on Facebook has become. And the medium is not matched to the interaction type anymore. So I think it could really catch on, where essentially you enter into a conversation on Facebook. It's prompted probably by something you see, and then you start talking to it, and once you're ready to commit it, which may be the second take or something, you immediately get a reply from somebody who's been listening from the beginning of your take. And then it goes into a real-time conversation, which can then be edited down, clipped for the good parts, and automatically, to a large extent automatically, because editing audio manually is very annoying. But this combination of synchronous and asynchronous together, I think, would be a killer app, and could do to Facebook what Facebook did to MySpace. And again, that's way too much for one person to take on all by myself. What I'd like to do is to create the key technologies with these competitions, and then set people off on the path of doing it, and then have the Key Prize that's no longer called the Key Prize Foundation. It'd be called the Steve Jobs Foundation. Be able to use its investment portfolio to also invest in the companies that come out of this, and then hopefully become the largest entity in the world, against which I would then compete as president, running the governmental sector, because essentially it would become more and more directly, as a non-governmental organization, come into competition with governments, doing the things that governments normally do. Mm-hmm. So that's 30 years out, and then the goal would be to move on back to my home in New York. And if I live into my 90s and function into my 90s, become General Secretary at the United Nations, and maybe make good on John Bolton's observation that the top 10 floors could be lopped off without any loss of functionality, or rather maybe an improvement. So get all the kleptomaniacs up there at the same time when I'm about 100. It can be done with a splash.
We like it. We like it. So, hey, what was with Mr. Harteneck because I saw he was invited onto this session.
Well,
Is he alive?
Mr. Harteneck, I don't know if I told you the story about what happened with Ralphie, but Ralphie used to feed me brand new, just released to the market copies of Microsoft software, which is usually sort of beta release. Anyway, I got one copy that was particularly officious in August of 2001. And I had been using it to search my mail stack, which has gotten to be sizable. So it took 20 minutes to search my mail stack and find things in my mail. So when I upgraded, it went to 1 hour and 20 minutes. And I was really rather perturbed by this. So I sent an email. Of course, Gates was in antitrust courts in Europe and the US at the time. And I sent an email to Bill Gates and copied Ralph on him, which simply said, if you don't get your cushy-tushy back to business, your next public excoriation will be for reducing national productivity. And Ralph was furious. And then I sent Ralph the coup de grace.
Ralph was kind of upset by that.
He was rather upset. And then I sent him the coup de grace, which was if I too had been in the Argentine military when it was taking citizens out to sea and dropping them from 2,000 feet, then I would have been also much better prepared for American corporate life.
But Ralph wasn't taking people for helicopter rides.
No. But he was in the military
He was a squaddy in the army.
Yeah.
It was the Navy who used to drop people out of the helicopters.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you got the details.
In my Argentinian travels, I got into trouble over that because there was this guy Juan Astiz, who's Teniente Abstiz, whose sobriquet was the blonde angel of death, because he was very good looking, and he was in his early 20s. This would be back in, I suppose, the early 80s, and he would infiltrate these left-wing groups with his guitar and an ample supply of good marijuana, and then nothing good would happen to them. And he became a national hero because he was the first to storm ashore against the British in the Malvinas campaign. Then years later, then the Swedish wanted to extradite him when he was a British prisoner at the end of that war because of some Swedish nuns who turned out had been dropped out of the helicopter. You can imagine it with their habits, like parachutes, as they descended into the Atlantic.
Right.
But he got given an amnesty, which was revoked. And I was saying to our guy Jorge, who was managing our company in Argentina, I was saying, well, at least the left-wing government's done one good thing, which is to revoke the amnesty for this monster. Jorge said, he's my oldest friend, and I see him every month in prison. And he's one of our national heroes who's been so abused. And then our Anglo-Argentinian president, Charlie, said, people like you, Domenic, have no comprehension what it is to fight against communism. So who knows? The other thing you have to be very careful of in Argentina when people have German-sounding names is not to ask them when their family migrated from Europe.
Right.
Good God. Yeah, quite.
Because the answer is they haven't really quite migrated. They've just become Hungarians.
Well, actually, on our place, we had this wonderful guy who was the capitas of the Gaucho team, and he had worked for us since 1946, when he was 13 years old, and till he retired about 5 years ago. And his story was amazing because his family had been Volga Germans. And when Hitler and Stalin were allies, the Volga Germans got transferred to Poland, where it never really worked out. They kicked the Poles out and the Volga Germans moved into the Poles' farmsteads. But then at the end of World War II, that wasn't a great sort of demographic to belong to for all sorts of obvious reasons. So he, by that stage, at the age of 12, managed to work his passage on a ship to Argentina. Can you imagine that? So he was actually very happy to talk about, when he left the Reich, and for what reasons. These were amazing stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And you tend to find that a lot in that neck of the woods. So who knows what the Hartnett story was?
Indeed, who knows? But Senior Hartnett had probably
But he
passed
used
by
to be.
now.
But I remember how cute he used to be when we were at Stony Ridge. We all were back then. I was looking at some photos not so long ago with Lucas, and I was saying, "Who's that good-looking guy?" And actually, it was me. Wow. But you were in the picture too, Bruce.
Oh, I think you're far
So
better
was
looking now,
Ralph.
Dominic, actually.
And Julio was looking. Thank you very much for that, Colin. And Julio was looking a bit anemic, actually.
Well, yeah, so that's not
I think
surprising.
he's got a lot chubbier, which is probably a good thing. It was the cocaine he kept on taking, I think.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't get what he wanted at the food stores unless we were all gone, which he cleared out and then left all of the plates and dishes out for Pascaline and I to find after we came back from a ski trip.
Oh, you put all the plates and dishes on his bed, didn't you?
No, some of them, but we mostly cleaned it up. We put some of Ralph's plates in front of his door. He was furious about that. But
yeah. And then there was the time with you when you had that very noisy girlfriend. The screamer.
Which one?
What was she called?
Pascaline.
Pascaline.
Oh, yes.
Pascaline, yeah. When we put the bagpipe music of the Gales on, which actually was a record which Norman had lent me.
I
Do you
don't remember
that
that.
LP?
Oh,
It was the sister to Anyone Can Yodel, which
that
and I
was
think.
the Brenton Lalor.
I think that only encouraged us,
We
Dominic.
louned the loudspeakers along Bruce's bedroom wall, and then when Pascaline started, we let the needle come down on the mass bagpipe music of the Gales. She was really pissed off. I remember that.
Do you? I
And then
don't
there was
remember
another
that at all.
awful time
I don't remember
when
that at all.
what looked like toffee in one of our saucepans turned out to be Pascaline's waxing treatment, which was quite hairy.
That I do remember. That I do remember. Pascaline had the ability to climax concurrently with some reliability because she would twist up and up and up and up. So as I was starting to come to orgasm, she would come up more, which reduced my sensitivity and increased hers. And by the end, there would be literally on top of her, she'd be totally bent over like a croissant.
Yep.
It was great fun.
Girl.
She was great fun. You know that she married a .com decimillionaire, I guess it was.
I know. I met Pascaline not so long ago with Marianne, and I think it would have been probably March last year, because I've been doing a regular teaching gig at Columbia in January and March, which may not be for a while. And so Marianne and Lucas and I went out for dinner with Pascaline, who's become rather a grand lady. I have to say,
I can imagine that.
We were
yes.
definitely in the presence of one of the great and the good.
Yes.
I thought of reminding her about the bagpipe music of the Gales, but when someone is a member of the great and the good, you have to allow them that attitude, I think.
that semblance. Pascaline used to say that.
I discovered this because when one of my British Stanford chums, Lorna, was being particularly great and good and rather patronising, it has to be said, I did remind her of her visits to Stony Ridge Ranch and her experiences with the mushrooms. And that didn't go down at all well, particularly since it was in front of her 25-year-old son, my godson.
She got very, very teed off at me. I was chauffeuring her and other GS beers around Los Angeles in a big soft riding American car. Took a corner rather fast. You never heard anybody go off with backseat driving instructions like Lorna did.
The other person who speaks fondly of you from time to time is that Paul Dawson.
Yes, you must see Paul rather often.
Well, not very much, because he's been living in Wisconsin and Bordeaux.
What?
But
Wisconsin?
he recently popped up to the surface, so he's reconnected with a little group of us from those Stanford days. Oddly enough, with the exception of Paul, not people who I really knew, but we kind of connected at a reunion, which is something I avoid. But I went to my first ever Stanford reunion 5 years ago, and there was a bunch of people who I had really not clocked when I was there. Just 4 of them, and we had a lovely time. And so we've
I can well imagine.
and
Yeah.
Paul was, and it's good.
Well,
good.
I had no idea he was Wisconsin as well as France. I knew he was in the south of France.
Well, Charles, his remote other half, is in Wisconsin.
Ah, very remote.
Yeah. And Paul is in Bordeaux, which is a very pretty town.
Well,
Very pretty town. But look, gentlemen, I'm going to have to renew my acquaintance with a chicken that I'm in charge of.
very good. Well, that sounds wonderful, Dominic. It's great to see you. I hope we get to renew this in somewhat less than 20 years.
We shall.
I believe so.
No, I remember we had a wild time. We had a wild time when you came to stay with me in 1996 in that little London flat.
Oh Lord, yeah. Well, I was a bit of a state then, I'm afraid. I was a very.
Well, you were as ever wild. That's a good thing to be.
Yeah, well.
Never stop wild.
I'm going to have to.
Okay, well, let's have cocktails
tame it.
later in the week or next week.
Unfortunately,
We'd love it.
Know where you'll be.
We'd love it. And we won't be going anywhere. We're in the Isle of Skye for the duration of this thing, which I could well imagine
could be recurring.
it'll be at least the.
Could be recurring and months long. I think this is a wonderful engineered
When
epidemic.
do you think you'll be released?
Well, my betting is there'll be some easing up on movement restrictions, probably in a month's time, but they will start to affect people like me probably end of June. And then I think the other reality is most of us just have to take our chances with this thing. So it's a little bit like, in the old days with smallpox. So before vaccination came along with Edward Jenner, the practice, mostly from China, but which came to Europe, was variolation. So you would essentially choose when to contract variola, which was smallpox, and you'd want to get the scabs off someone who'd had a mild version of the virus, variola minor. And variolation carried a small mortality risk, which was infinitely less than variola major. So I think we'll be in that kind of, ancient Chinese territory. If you look up smallpox variolation, you'll see what they were on about. And basically, it was in China of old, you would prepare yourself for this morally and physically for a period of 6 to 12 months before you would deliberately expose yourself. They'd grind the scabs up and blow them up your nose, and it was an effective practice.
Yep, interesting. Mm-hmm.
Well, it might be interesting to see if they will interpret who's most sensitive to this virus, and if they can figure that out, then we can make a wiser decision whether to expose ourselves.
Well, that's what I hope will happen. So we'll have a little bit more information. I think a virus, coronavirus vaccines, they've been trying the common cold forever. Maybe there's not been enough money in it. But coronaviruses are notoriously difficult to develop vaccines for.
Well, it's probably very much like a cold vaccine because it'll migrate.
There are so many variants; it's an impossible moving target.
Well, with flu, we've got pretty smart. So flu mutates, at least one step, and in the more severe outsteps, it's a 3-step mutation.
But last year we
the
failed
vaccine.
in our vaccine. Last year we failed in our flu vaccine. It was the wrong vaccine, and that's could be typical.
Yes and no. So it's a case of the degree of effectiveness. So I think typically for flu, you target 40% effectiveness for the vaccine. And together with some latent herd immunity, that's usually enough to stop an epidemic kicking off. And in a bad year, the flu vaccine's 20% effective. If it's a 5 or 6 step mutation. 1918 was a 12-step mutation. So this one is looking like this one's pretty similar to 1918, I think. The difference being that 1918 hit young people much, much harder than old people. So the high case fatality rate was 15 to 30.
Yeah, quite devastating.
And old people were largely spared because you didn't get the aggressive immune system response. No, so my feeling is it'll be when to get ill rather than if to get ill. But in the meantime, in the Isle of Skye, we're fortifying ourselves with decent food and decent wine, which is the best preparation, Norman.
Well, it has worked for you, Dominic, for decades.
We've had some improvement because about 4 years ago, I bought a freezer, which has been sitting in the garage. We've never used it. And I finally cut off the carton and installed the freezer. And now for the first time, we actually have cartons of ice cream available at home.
Vintage?
No, new. We've gone out and stocked our new freezer.
Yep.
So
right. Talking of food, I'm getting a summons because the chicken's about to come out of the oven, and I need to make it my friend.
Well, don't forget to put your chicken on Instagram. That's what we do here.
No. Yeah. Bye, boys.
All right. Right.
Well, it's good to see you, Bruce.
Yep. Good to see you too, Norman. That was very entertaining. Thank you for helping to arrange that. You had a whole half hour with Dominic before I got on.
Things, because it's your private. Well, anyway, the Jitsi was not passworded, so it was easy. And I think as soon as we don't have 40-minute limits, but as soon as we both log out, I believe that the name Boston Bruce disappears. So the first person to log on with that name, we actually own it for as long as somebody stays online.
I see.
And you can password it. But I don't think there's any way to make a name permanent. Or there probably is if you host it on your own machine.
Well, then you just leave it up all the time.
Yeah, you can leave it up all the time. It's funny. Each of these systems has their own peculiarities.
Well, Zoom allows you to have a permanent room ID, but it's a random number, and
if you pay for it. And
yeah, I guess that's true. But
I like to support open source as much as I can, whereas Zoom is a black box.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
I had a pretty good session on Skype this morning, which I hadn't used Skype in 12 years.
How many channels is that, or participants does that support?
I don't know. Actually, I have no idea. That's an interesting point because everybody's got Skype available. Everybody who's got a Windows computer because it comes with Windows.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've got to get a real computer in any case. I'm just messing around here with iPads and iPhones.
Well, I think real computers are overrated now that we have iPads and iPhones.
Well, sort of, except that the iPads and iPhones aren't true multitasking. So a lot of apps don't multitask nicely. So it's
Oh, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Your iPhone, can you easily plug in an external monitor, or do you have to do it by Wi-Fi?
Well, I don't know. An external monitor on the iPad would sort of, I mean, I guess you could, but I don't know what the point would be because,
Well, just to have a large screen.
yeah, but you can bring the iPad very close. Just put on reading glasses. It's not going to improve your resolution.
Or to have a second screen.
I don't know that it
That's
supports that.
connected.
I don't think I've ever seen that configuration. Of course, it's a touch screen,
Yeah.
so it would make things awkward.
Well, anyway, I'm going to take off because I haven't had breakfast yet, but now I have to reorganize and turn it into lunch.
Oh, you're massively overdue for breakfast. Massively.
And also, I need to load the bread maker so that we'll have some bread ready for dinner.
That sounds good. And when Jillian comes home.
Well, no, Jillian's home today, but she's locked in her room consulting with patients. It looks like she'll be able to take off 2 days a week. Not actually take off, but be here rather than at the hospital. This weekend, for the most part, she has to be at the hospital on call, which is not exciting. And her suspicion is, I don't know whether you were online when we mentioned it, is that in about 2 to 3 weeks, she'll hardly have to go into the hospital because most of her patients that she's doing surgery on or follow-ups are people who come in by screening, and they're not going to be doing screening like mammograms. So that will not be funneling her patients. There'll be a lot of interesting books written if we survive this. Both medical, economic.
So how I wonder how recently we got enough capacity in the network to support all the video that's suddenly going on now. It's really quite interesting that it all just works.
It's quite astounding. But I guess things like Zoom and Jitsi and Skype are not taking a lot of bandwidth.
Well, I'm assuming that those take advantage of the internet protocols to multicast straight to all of the participants, so it's not going through a central mixer.
Well, one of the things with Jitsi is that you can host it on your own computer. And in fact, we're not hosting it on our computer, but I think we're on somebody's volunteer computer. I don't know how to trace that, but it's not a corporation with a central mainframe.
Right.
It's happening which is a fascinating process to me.
Well, that's the way the early Skype also worked. It only maintained a directory centrally, and the communications were peer-to-peer, which this video also must be. So
you said Skype?
Yeah, I think they may have backed away from peer-to-peer, but it was, or at least originally, it was peer-to-peer. That's what distinguished it.
Well, now it's all Microsoft, and it was interesting to log in because the application looks just like Zoom or Jitsi or any of the others. You log into Skype and it'll be quite familiar. It's not like it was 10 years ago. And it worked very smoothly and almost intuitively.
Well, they have to compete with FaceTime, which is incredibly straightforward for Apple users.
Yeah, well, FaceTime's got too many. Well, of course they have to compete with it. Well, we can try later in the week doing a Skype conference, but again, you have to call somebody on it.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say, I have to look up. I have to look up Bruce at Discuss It or whatever your Skype name is.
Yeah, I think it's Bruce _ McHenry. Or Bruce.McHenry.
Oh,
Actually,
okay.
I have two Microsoft IDs, Bruce _ and Bruce.McHenry. So.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to look up and see what mine is. I have no idea. I was able to call out because seem to know who I was. And it seems to have my address book from 11 years ago,
Right.
which might be interesting. I could do some archaeology and find some old friends and see if they're still friends.
Well, speaking of
So this guy, Ralph,
yeah,
what is Ralph's last name?
Hartenek, Harteneck. His father was head of the Argentine Security and Exchange Commission for a while there.
Of the what commission? Sorry.
SEC.
What?
Argentine SEC.
Oh. Harteneck.
ECK.
Oh, okay. I'll look him up. I wanted to look him up, and I typed the name wrong, I guess, and I got a porn site instead.
That's sort of fitting. Well, he got married and had kids after he left Microsoft in Seattle in America, and I think he's primarily residing actually at Punta del Este in Uruguay, or has two homes, one there and one in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, well, I've been reading about Punta del Este, and it sounds like it's, the great vacation spot for the rich folk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've never been in that area. I'm kind of disappointed that Domenic has finally sold his ranch down there.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because I've been planning for years to go visit him there.
I never got to see it.
Did he ever send you the picture of him sitting there on a sofa with a baby mountain lion on his lap?
No, I never did.
It was very cute.
I'm sure.
I'll see if I can find it in my archives. If it's still there, I'll send it to you.
Oh, that'd be lovely. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm glad you finally made contact with Domenic. It sounds like you had a good conversation.
Well, we had a mutual friend, actually. I wanted to follow up with Domenic about it maybe the next call, because he would have known David Blumberg quite well, who got into a rather heated debate with my mother when he came up for dinner at the ranch and my mother was visiting. David Blumberg is is actually a super nice guy who is rather a Zionist, which is what he was arguing with my mother about. And he's also been in venture capital and targeted, I would say, relatively modest-sized markets, but quite successfully. And I saw one presentation of his where he was extremely coherent and well-spoken. Quite a gentleman, David Blumberg. He was in Domenic's class.
Oh, Ralph's got lots of pictures of himself on the internet. There's one picture of him, which is probably not him because he's in an SS uniform.
You're not serious. You can't be serious.
It says 19. There's.
You'll have to send me a link.
It's Gustav Harteneck that's in the SS uniform.
Well, it may be a relation.
Yeah, we don't really want to know.
Well, you know the story of my family, Norman. My mother was dating RAF officers while her sister was dating Luftwaffe officers.
That sounds like, gosh, who was it who wrote Little Boxes? The member of that, among the most dysfunctional British families ever.
The title of the book is Little Boxes.
Oh, no, you remember the song, Little Boxes?
Yes. Arlo Guthrie.
The woman who wrote that.
I think.
Pardon me?
Arlo Guthrie wrote Little Boxes, didn't he? But
No.
Pete Seeger certainly covered it.
Oh no, they all sang. That was the beginning of her fame. Well, here. I feel so embarrassed that my brain's not working.
Yeah.
Malvina Reynolds. Oh, it was Malvina Reynolds. And she was a member of the most dysfunctional British family. They ranged from Nazis, one of Hitler's girlfriends, to Jews and communists. I think there were something like 10 or 11 daughters.
Well, I don't know.
But she lived for a while in San Francisco.
Well, I don't know where you get the pictures of Ralph Hartnett, because I'm looking here at Ralph Hartnett. I get Flickr. It says he hasn't made any photos public yet.
I got about a dozen. I'm not sure whether there are any actual pictures of his. Well, type Ralph Hartnett pictures.
Images. I get images, and maybe I'll get something here. La Nueva Generación.
Yeah,
oh, here he is. The New Generation. That's an old picture of Ralph. The New Generation. There's, We'll have to look through these. Yeah, there are a bunch of pictures in there. I didn't know when I click on pictures. Anyway.
Yeah, well, just stay away from Gustav.
Well, I thought he had something to do with this entity down there in Buenos Aires that was started by a professor called Bravo Motors. And it looked like it was sort of a setup for me to go down there and take over the CTO role effectively and turn them on to road trains and do something unique. They raised $7 million, but then they just started jetting around the world to places like Davos without a clue as to how to actually contribute. It was really a disaster. Giselle, my girlfriend, was their PR person. And it was a huge bone of contention because they had set up in Gibraltar to do an internet coin offering, and they wanted to go from 7 million to 150 million with the ICO. And then they missed that narrow window, and they were just absolutely ditzy as Giselle, and made for each other. She scotched a meeting I was to have had with them at Woodside, and it never came together at all. But it's still a cause maybe for me to go to Buenos Aires and try and pick up some pieces someday.
It sounds like it's a reasonable place to visit at the moment, except for their government, which is not too unlike ours.
Well, you just want to go down there and buy property when the peso is at its pessimal point, which they do frequently.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people. It sounds like Uruguay's being a good place to buy property. Tell me the name of this woman you were talking about, who's now living in New York. I want to look up her picture.
Pascaline Servan-Chabert. She was the daughter of
Pascaline.
Yeah, she was the daughter not of Jean-Jacques, the writer of Le Défi Américain, which was around early 1970s, was about American corporatism and its challenge to Europe, but of Jean-Jacques' brother, who didn't found L'Express.
What's her last name?
Servan-Schreiber.
Spell her last name.
SERVAN hyphen SCHREIBER.
Schroeder?
No, Schreiber. SCH.
Schreiber. Yeah, that pops up. So she must be one of the.
Yeah, she's the son of the brother who started L'Expansion, which is like French Fortune, and her uncle was better known. He started L'Express, which is like Newsweek over there, and also was a writer of several books, best-selling books. Most notably, Le Défi Américain, about American corporatism.
Is she Servan-Schreiber also?
Yeah, she's also. Well, I don't know. I think she wouldn't have dropped that name just to get married.
There's the Pascaline Servan-Schreiber.
Yeah, she kept the name through the marriage.
Vice President for Business. Well, anyway, she's quite an elegant-looking woman.
Yeah, she's now 60-ish. She used to tell me that she wanted to burn fast and bright, and wanted to be dead by 60. I think she's probably changed her mind.
And she produced a film of some sort, because she's under IMDb as well.
Yeah, no, she's doing non-profit charitable things, I think, mainly. She raised a family, and moved over to the West Side, and has been involved in classic liberal causes.
she was in the business school.
No. She wanted to desperately be employed at Apple. Steve Jobs rebuffed her. She kept at it because she was friends with Jean-Louis Gasset, who was then CTO. And
Yeah.
eventually, she got a job there while Jobs was still around. And her main job story was she's sitting at her desk, and Jobs pops his head in and goes, "Oh, you finally you managed to get in, did you?"
Uh, how funny. Well, I'm going to go off and make sure that I eat
She was
lunch
she was
and
actually a
get
huge
something
friend
done.
of Jobs's main most trusted assistant. I've forgotten her name now, but they were very close friends, Pascaline and what was her name now? God, she's still very active in the tech scene. It'll come to me in a minute after we hang up.
Yeah, that's a good reason to hang up because we can fill in all the lines we couldn't think of before.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm off.
All right, good to see you, Dorman.
Take care. Well,
Yeah.
we'll be in touch.
That
We
was-
know how to find
That
you.
was fun. Let's do it again soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.